What if Sansa pushed and killed Joffrey? Let's explore the depths of it in the video. Sansa takes a deep breath, steeling herself for what she is about to do. For once, she tells herself to do as Arya does. She doesn't think or consider what this might mean. She only acts. As Joffrey turns around, he regards her curiously. But that curiosity quickly turns to fear as she grabs hold of his shoulders. He opens his mouth to protest, while Meryn Trant shouts behind her, but she ignores them both. Instead, all she focuses on is Joffrey. For all his talk, it is remarkably easy. He barely puts up a fight as she shoves him over the ledge. His arms flail as he screams out, and then there is a sickening crack. When she glances over, she sees Joffrey's body splayed on the ground, broken as a pool of blood forms around him. But Meryn Trant's shout pulls her back. The knight advances on her with his sword raised over his head. She prepares for the end, but then the hound moves faster. His sword is out and intercepts his strike. The two are locked in combat, but only for a moment. The hound suddenly roars and shoves the Kingsguard back. Their blades flash together, but the hound is larger and goes on the offensive. He smirks as a glimmer of fear crosses the knight. When he advances again, Sir Meryn retreats, the hound's momentum carrying him forward. The knight tries to retreat into the galley, but the hound doesn't let him. Grabbing hold of his breastplate, the larger warrior shoves Meryn behind him, letting him join Joffrey on the ground below. Sansa can only stare, the sound of the knight's screams echoing in her ears. But then the hound grabs her shoulder and shoves her away.
Don't look. We have to go now, little bird.
He sheathes his longsword as he guides Sansa away from the Red Keep. For the first few minutes, they try to walk calmly, acting as if nothing is wrong. No one dares question why the hound is with the Queen's betrothed. But then they hear a scream echoing from the Red Keep, which they take as their signal to move faster. They barely manage to get out of the Red Keep and disappear into the city. Meanwhile, Cersei is in a frenzy when she hears this, ordering the entire city locked down to find Sansa. When the hound is reported missing too, she believes that the dog must be looking for her and doesn't think about it. However, in her eagerness, all sorts of discretion is lost and news begins to spread. Servants all whisper fearfully about how the king has died, murdered by his future wife. These spread out of the city as servants gossip with their friends, and those friends to merchants and traders. By nightfall, the rumors are now all anyone can talk about in King's Landing. Unfortunately, these rumors do little to produce Sansa, as though the Goldcloaks lock down the city gates, it is too late, and the pair manage to escape. With them, the rumors also go flying as merchants and small folk travel in and out of the city hear the news. The story soon reached the high lords and ladies of Westeros, among them the armies in the field. When Tywin hears about this, he is sent into a rage at Cersei's failure. Not only did they lose the king, their only claim to legitimacy, but they also allowed Sansa to escape, who was perhaps their greatest hostage. Without her, nothing is stopping the Starks from executing Jaime. He decides to send Tyrion to King's Landing immediately, telling him to restore the situation as best he can while he tries to deal with Robb Stark. But Tywin doesn't stop there. He also orders Cersei to be removed from the capital immediately, deeming her a liability in the war effort. In contrast, the Baratheons are ecstatic about this development. They see this as a golden opportunity to take King's Landing and both scramble their armies. Renly, instead of a leisurely march, hurries with his fastest troops to reach the capital and take it while it is leaderless. Stannis remains quiet, leaving many to wonder what is happening. Meanwhile, the Stark forces watch this with bated breath. While pleased to hear of Joffrey's death, their real concern is where Sansa and Arya are. In the meantime, they cannot afford to let up the pressure with such a golden opportunity. Robb decides to gather his forces and rides west to further harass the Lannisters and force them to terms. However, Rickard Karstark grows more vocal about Jaime Lannister, urging Robb to execute him. The young king is less eager to do this, first wishing to determine what happened to his sisters. He asks his uncle and mother to begin gathering information about what happened to Sansa and Arya before making his decision. In the capital, the entire city is in chaos because of the recent assassination. Cersei has begun executing anyone she suspects of having a role in her son's murder, whether it be servants, guards, or simple small folk. She is even more incensed when Tyrion arrives instead of Tywin. But as she reads the letter written by Tywin dismissing her, she can hardly believe it.
This cannot be real. I am the Queen Regent, not some lowly servant who can be dismissed on a whim.
Yes, and what a wonderful job you have done so far. But Lord Tywin is the hand of the king you allowed to die. But unlike you, that position has authority. Now, will you cooperate?
What did you do to convince our father to go along with this foolishness?
When have I ever been able to convince our father of anything? No, this was his decision, and only his decision, based on the blunders you have stumbled into. Now, the ship has been prepared and will leave at nightfall to Volantis. I suggest you begin packing if you wish to make it.
If you think I will abandon my children...
On the contrary, I intend to send them with you. Now, off you go, and let them know of the exciting adventure they will be going on.
Ah, I see what you've done. You wish us gone so you can rule. So you can be king. So Barrows, so Preston, seize him.
Now. A city about to be under siege is a poor prize for all that plotting, don't you think? Good sirs, tell me, to whom do you owe the white cloaks to? My dear sister, or Lord Tywin?
The two knights share a look, glancing at one another before ushering the queen out despite her protests. Once she is gone, Tyrion begins organizing the defenses of the city. In truth, he would have gladly joined them in the Free Cities, but someone must stay and handle the defenses. As long as Tommen and Myrcella remain alive, the Lannisters still have a claim. However, the situation does not look good. With Renly fast approaching and Stannis breathing down their neck, they are in no position to resist. More importantly, the loss of Sansa means that they have no real bargaining power, as he soon learns they do not have Arya either. This puts them in an impossible position, with only one real option. They must negotiate peace with Robb Stark to focus on Renly. While Robb had presented terms to the capital, these were meant as a formality more than anything else. However, the Lannister must seriously consider them. Tywin is initially infuriated by this, but Tyrion points out an opportunity in this chaos. Whatever terms they agree to can be reneged on later by simply saying that Sansa is guilty of regicide and acting under Robb Stark's order, allowing them to declare war once they've dealt with the Baratheons. Despite himself, Tywin sees no other choice. Soon, terms are sent. Ned Stark's bones, along with those of his household, are to be returned to Winterfell alongside the greatsword Ice. They will also release the knights and lords captured throughout the war under the expectations that Robb will do the same for his captives. But perhaps most seriously, Robb will be granted the lands of the North and Riverlands as an independent kingdom. While Robb sent these terms as a formality, he is stunned to learn that Tywin is willing to accept them. However, these come with some caveats. The first is that Robb must halt his offensive in the Westerlands immediately, and that Tywin should be given free passage with his troops through the Riverlands. More importantly, Robb is not to take further part in this war and join no other side. The terms are too good to be true, and the King of the North accepts it, withdrawing his forces from the Westerlands and taking most of his army home, save for those who will watch over the border. To their surprise, rather than march east to King's Landing, Tywin instead takes his soldiers home to the Westerlands. He realizes the capital is lost, but that does not mean his army needs to be lost with them. The city means little to him now, since his family is gone. All he needs to do is rebuild and bide his time until the Baratheons destroy each other. The River Lords allow him to march home, but with stern warnings that any further looting and pillaging will be considered a violation of the treaty. By the time the army leaves, the Riverlands are a patchwork of mud and blood, villages burned to ash and fields churned into graves. Sansa Stark pulls her cloak tighter, its once fine fabric now threadbare and stained from weeks on the run. Beside her, Sandor Clegane keeps close watch over her, one hand never far from his longsword as he looks around for any brigands. They soon reach a riverbank and search for a fjord. However, as they prepare to cross, they hear the sound of movement from the woods, and a few figures appear, bearing the mark of House Blackwood. They have longbows trained at them. Their leader pushes their hood down, and his eyes widen as he sees the hound's face.
It's Sandor Clegane, Joffrey's dog.
The men-at-arms prepare to attack as the hound rips his longsword free from its scabbard, roaring defiantly. However, Sansa steps between them.
Stop! He saved me. Do not harm him. He is my escort.
And who are you to speak for him, girl?
I am Sansa Stark of Winterfell, daughter of Lord Eddard and Lady Catelyn. The Hound saved me from King's Landing after Joffrey Baratheon's death.
Murmurs ripple through the group. Some of the men call her a liar and say they should arrest them, but the knight is less certain. Suddenly, an idea pops into her head as she begins to recite the names of the Lords of the Trident, of her siblings, and of the Northern Lords, things no commoner will know. The soldiers remain skeptical, but the knight glances over at her.
If you truly are a Stark, you'll come with us to Riverrun. Lord Tully and King Robb will know if you speak true.
The men surround them, wary but no longer hostile, and lead them through the war-ravaged lands toward Riverrun. It takes several days, but soon the towering castle looms ahead, its banners fluttering in the breeze. As they cross the drawbridge, Sansa's heart aches with both relief and fear. Inside the great hall, Robb Stark stands at the head of the room, his crown slightly askew, his expression wary but alert. Catelyn Stark sits beside him, her eyes widening as she recognizes her daughter. The moment Sansa enters, Robb descends the dais, crossing the room in swift strides.
Sansa!
Robb.
They pull each other into a tender embrace. A moment later, Catelyn joins them, her voice coming out in sobs as she looks at her two eldest children. Her body shakes as she strokes their hair. Robb pulls back and smiles, tears shining in his eyes while he regards her.
We thought you were lost.
When the initial shock wears off, Robb's gaze shifts to the Hound, his expression hardening.
What is he doing here?
He saved me. I would not be here if not for him.
I see. Then you have my thanks, sir. I'm no knight, boy king.
They sit, and Sansa recounts her tale. How Joffrey tormented her until one day, on the Red Keep battlements, she found herself standing behind him as she made him look at the heads of the people he had killed. In a rush of anger, she pushed him over the ledge, and the Hound escorted her to safety.
That monster. The death you gave him is one too good for him. But I'm glad you're safe. But tell me, do they still have Arya?
I haven't seen her since everything happened. I don't know where she is.
We'll find her, Sansa. We're together now, and we'll bring our family back.
The guards are rewarded for their help, and the Hound is taken in as Sansa's new bodyguard. With this news, they at least have confirmation that Arya is out of Lannister hands. However, she soon turns up in the most unlikely place, alongside Yoren and a group of Night's Watch recruits. He had found her wandering around the city by herself, having escaped the massacre in the Red Keep. He recognized her during Ned Stark's execution and spirited her out of the city. The reunion with her is equally tearful, as the two embrace the young Stark, welcoming her back with a smile and an embrace. For a moment, things seem at peace with the Starks. However, King's Landing is anything but peaceful, as the first groups of Renly's men arrive at the outskirts of the city. They soon put the city under siege, cutting off all supplies as they herald the arrival of Renly. Some of the men urge the people of King's Landing to surrender, but as Renly arrives, no such uprising takes place, leaving them no choice but to storm the city. Unfortunately for Renly, time is not on his side, as he receives word that Stannis has landed in Storm's End and has begun harassing his forces there. Though the local lords believe they can handle him, his elder brother is squatting right in the middle of his supply lines, preventing him from getting reinforcements or supplies. With only his speediest troops with him, Renly has a force of about 30,000, the rest of them at Bitterbridge or scattered across the Stormlands. This allows Stannis to begin waging a guerrilla war, taking towns and villages to bolster his forces while reinforcing his position to besiege Storm's End. The forces left behind are helpless to Stannis, who proves an able commander. This puts Renly in a difficult position, to take King's Landing as quickly as possible. The capital stands defiant against Renly's assault, its walls bristling with archers and its gates barred tight. The golden lion banners of House Lannister flutter in the hot breeze, but within, the city's resources dwindle. Hunger gnaws at the small folk, and whispers of surrender ripple through the streets. Renly's army, 30,000 strong, encircles the capital. His bannermen grow restless, their patience thinning as their last assault has been rebuffed, suffering heavy losses in the process. Cursing his luck, Renly begins organizing another assault. This time, he decides to throw everything he has. As the trumpet sounds, siege towers roll forward, shrugging off the hail of arrows, the wooden frames creaking as they inch toward the city walls. Battering rams smash against the gates, while ladders rise against the stone battlements. Gold cloaks, sellswords, and men-at-arms all stare at one another in shock, wondering how they can halt such an attack. But fight on they do, raining arrows and stones down, while pots of wildfire are hurled into the siege towers. Where arrows and pitch fail, this unstable substance gets the job done. The great wooden structures go up in flames. Green fire flickers across their bodies, and rising higher and higher until a great green pillar emerges. Inside, men scream and stumble around, trying to scramble out of the burning tower. Whereas most rush out the door, their armor burning as they run, a few brave souls rush upwards, aiming to land on the walls as the tower is pressed right against them. The first is a dashing figure in gold and white armor. The famed Knight of Flowers leaps out, sword in hand. Gold cloaks can only look in awe as they see the figure emerging, seemingly unhurt like some ancient hero. They are swiftly cut down as his long sword flashes. A handful of men-at-arms see this and rally around him, creating a small island of Baratheon troops on the wall. Seeing this, Renly himself rides up to the front lines, his green armor gleaming in the morning light. His presence inspires his troops, their war cries echoing off the city walls, and he orders his men to support them. A few brave souls pick up a fallen ladder and position it close by as men rush up to support them, providing much-needed support. Though the rams and other towers go up in wildfire, this small island grows larger and larger as more men rush up. Soon the defenders break as this section of wall is under their control. A tower follows after, allowing them to capture that section and open a gate. With the doors open, the battle shifts to the streets, which run red with blood as Renly's forces stream through. The fighting here truly turns ugly as it takes hours of street-to-street fighting to secure the position. Within the city, chaos reigns. Lannister loyalists fight street by street, but they are outnumbered and overwhelmed. Renly's knights cut through the resistance, their banners advancing toward the Red Keep. The city's small folk, desperate and starving, rise in rebellion, attacking the remaining Lannister forces and opening the gates for Renly's men. By nightfall, King's Landing is under Renly's control. The Iron Throne gleaming in the torchlight as Renly ascends the steps, victorious but wary. His triumph is overshadowed by the knowledge that Stannis still threatens from the south. But as he sits on the Iron Throne, he can't help but smile in satisfaction as he enjoys the feeling of his throne. The city smolders, its people battered and broken, but it is Renly's banners that now fly from the Red Keep. For the moment, he is the Ascendant. The next day, Renly begins his rule with the coronation outside the Sept of Baelor. It is an unusually somber affair, as Renly decides to forego its pomp out of respect for the recent destruction. But it ends with a stern message, that all usurpers like his brother and Tywin Lannister will be dealt with. In particular, he has nothing but harsh words for Robb Stark, naming him a rebel and secessionist. He announces there will be no negotiation with Robb, and that he is offering a large reward on his head. Tywin's plan soon comes into play, as he hears the announcement from Casterly Rock with a smile. It was all part of his strategy to ensure the best odds. By agreeing to Robb's terms, Tywin might have given the king in the north a temporary boost, but it also helped him. Robb essentially bound himself to Tywin's cause, and tacitly acknowledged that Lannister's claim was legitimate, making an enemy of both the Baratheons. But with Renly on the throne, Robb's independence is at stake, forcing him to either do nothing or support the Lannisters. This allows Tywin to focus simply on defending from the south against the Reach. As he fortifies his lands there, Renly can at least turn his attention to Stannis. He dispatches Randyll Tarly and Bryce Caron, two of his most trusted commanders, to confront Stannis in the Stormlands. Their combined forces march swiftly to prevent Stannis from gathering any more strength. They arrive and find the region in disarray. As Stannis' campaign proved to be effective and he managed to capture several lesser castles like Griffin's Roost, Weeping Town, and Tarth, the local forces sent against him were unable to hold him or were defeated one by one. Stannis was careful to avoid fighting battles he could not win and to use terrain to his advantage. This is where Lord Bryce and Randyll proved to be effective. They come with 8,000 men and begin reorganizing the defenses, gathering scattered troops and capturing a few isolated castles. They reinforce their position bit by bit while boxing Stannis in. Lords who join the older Baratheon are put to death, while those who remained loyal are commended and reinforced. Soon enough, their numbers begin to swell their ranks and provide them with a strong position to challenge Stannis' army. Though he tries to use the same tactics as before, Randyll is not easily baited and avoids open battles or attacking Stannis unless he is certain of victory. The sheer size of Renly's force forces Stannis to reconsider. With supply lines stretched thin and local support wavering, Stannis is compelled to abandon his siege on Storm's End, to have tactical mobility, and gathers his forces near the fields of Summerhall. As the armies prepare for battle, Stannis unleashes his Shadow Assassin in a desperate attempt to tilt the odds in his favor. The dark creature infiltrates the camp under the cover of night and assassinates Bryce Caron, sowing chaos and fear among Renly's troops. Some desert out of fear, others waver, but Randyll Tarly's iron will holds the army together. He restores order, putting some men to death to avoid a full-blown panic, and reorganizing the army. While it causes some delays, he rallies the rest in battle. The battle begins at dawn. Stannis' forces, though smaller, fight with the discipline and determination for which their leader is known. The initial clash is fierce, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. But as Stannis and his army retreat to a nearby hill, he has his longbowmen rain down arrows on Randyll Tarly's soldiers. The initial charge is rebuffed, giving Stannis some reprieve. This is only a temporary victory, as the Lord of Hornhill has his men dismount and march up on foot, his soldiers raising their shields above their heads and advancing under the cover. It is slow going, and the Baratheon cavalry only adds to the chaos, disrupting their formation and adding to the casualties. These maneuvers and relentless pressure wear down the Baratheon forces. As they are committed to breaking the infantry, a small force of Tarly's cavalry rushes in and breaks through Stannis' left flank, causing a ripple of disorder through his ranks. As the battle rages on, Tarly and his men lower shields and rush forward the remaining distance, rushing under the hail of arrows directly at Stannis' command position. Stannis fights valiantly, refusing to retreat despite the odds. He leads his men from the front, his sword cutting through Renly's soldiers with ruthless efficiency. But the tide of battle is against him. Surrounded and outnumbered, his forces begin to falter. Tarly's relentless assault shatters Stannis' lines, and the Baratheon army collapses. In the final moments, Stannis watches his army collapse around him, but refuses to give in to despair. As the Tarly forces advance through the fields of Summerhall, littered with the dead, a testament to the ferocity of the battle, he rushes right into the lines, going out in a blaze of glory. With Stannis' defeat, Renly's control over the south is now uncontested. The victory solidifies his power, leaving him the undisputed ruler of the southern kingdoms. From 4 kings, only 2 remain. One frustration from the fall of King's Landing was that none of the Lannisters beyond Tyrion were there. Little does he know that in Volantis, Cersei and her children remain, hiding, but also to start gathering allies in the Free Cities, rebuilding the Lannisters' prospects. Cersei Lannister looks across the table to where Harry Strickland is waiting. Despite calling him a sellsword, she cannot find anything fierce about the Captain General. But he still controls the largest and most respected sellsword company in the known world.
I think you know why I'm here. News of the Seven Kingdoms has doubtlessly reached your ears. Where there is war, there is gold, and I require soldiers. Many of them, and your Golden Company remains one of the finest in the world.
I see, Your Grace. But before we discuss matters, I do require certain assurances of success.
Meaning?
Begging your pardon, my lord, but you are not faring so well. First, your grandson is killed by his own bride, and then you are driven from King's Landing by Renly Baratheon. And then you must come to terms with this boy king from the north. You must admit, the odds do not look good. The Golden Company is good, but we're not that good.
My house has indeed suffered some reversals, but I assure you Robb Stark is not a threat. In truth, he owes his continued independence to my house. That leaves only Renly, and he is in King's Landing. He only has a small force in the Reach. If you require payment, then you may take the wealth of Highgarden.
That is a bold plan, I admit, although an expensive one. We will require funds to transport our soldiers, horses, and even the elephants. It will be difficult. That is not even mentioning the provisions we require.
You've been in exile for quite some time now, it seems. You should know there is a saying about my house. A Lannister always pays his debts.
Very well then. If you can provide us the down payment, I suppose we can send our troops eastward.
The two of them clasp hands and discuss some of the finer details. Once those are done, Harry takes his leave and returns to his barracks. However, as he departs, another figure watches from the shadows and approaches him. Harry explains that the contract has been signed and they will be sailing west soon. John Connington smiles and nods his head. Everything is going according to plan. Soon enough, they will be sailing westward, and with them, the true king of Westeros. Meanwhile, the war continues to rage in the Seven Kingdoms. Tywin Lannister continues his campaign of raids and harassment against the Reach. Rather than a full-scale invasion like what he did in the Riverlands, he opts for a smaller force of seasoned raiders and elite cavalry led by the Mountain and Adam Marbrand. These men attack the border castles and strike at nearby villages, but don't engage Mace Tyrell's host. They focus on terror, striking supply lines, torching granaries, and ambushing isolated detachments. Mace, eager for a decisive victory, pursues Tywin aggressively, but the older lion feigns weakness. However, he only has 10,000 men, and Tywin's seeming reluctance makes it seem like that is all he requires. Instead, the bulk of the Reach forces remain in the Riverlands, warring with Robb Stark. Renly Baratheon, King of the South, has no such strategies, and commits to an invasion, fighting Robb in a brutal series of battles. Despite being outnumbered, Robb proves himself the superior strategist, outmaneuvering Renly's lords and winning key engagements. He has the Rivermen act as pirates and raiders, using the rivers to strike swiftly and disappear before Renly can attack. When they do clash in the field, Robb is usually holding fjords, defending castles, and striking from the hills. These tactics are highly effective and result in the deaths of many of Renly's best and brightest knights. But for all their success, they cannot fully halt the invasion. Renly's army is 5 times the size of Tywin's, and he can easily spread his forces and search for weaknesses. Every victory for Robb is costly, and the Southern King continues his inexorable push northward. Sensing the deadlock in the Riverlands and recognizing an opportunity, Tywin Lannister approaches one person who has remained out of the war, Peter Baelish in the Vale. Littlefinger has never made any secret of his longing for Catelyn Stark, and requests Tywin secure a marriage alliance for him in exchange for the Vale-saving Robb. With these assurances in hand, he reaches out to Robb Stark with an unexpected proposition: the full backing of House Lannister in exchange for recognizing Tommen Baratheon as the rightful heir to the Iron Throne. It is pure political extortion, and everyone knows it. However, Tywin does not care and continues to ramp up the pressure, even encouraging the raids of Balon Greyjoy to the north and recruiting some raiders into his fleet. To solidify this alliance, Catelyn Stark must also marry Littlefinger. The Northmen are all horrified by this, but it is also politically impossible to refuse. She had essentially married off her son to one of Walder Frey's daughters. To refuse her would appear incredibly hypocritical, especially when it can save their kingdom. With his forces stretched thin and no clear path to ultimate victory, Robb reluctantly agrees. As the war drags on, the tides shift dramatically. At the peak of another pitched battle between Robb and Renly's army, the Knights of the Vale, led by Jon Royce, descend upon Renly's rear. The sudden assault throws the Baratheon host into disarray. What had been a grinding campaign transforms into a rout as the Vale Knights hit their supply lines. Within days, a dozen of their holdings fall, forcing Renly to retreat or be cut off. As the main offensive fails, Tywin Lannister finally decides to strike. While he was fighting a defensive war, the Golden Company was secretly funneling into the Westerlands, and as Mace begins his offensive, Tywin unleashes them upon him. The Lannister raiders who had been terrorizing the Reach all retreat to Krakenhall, which is at the border territories. Mace is in hot pursuit, cutting down any raiders too slow to stop him. His army first surrounds the castle as he orders his infantry to bring up the siege weapons through the ocean road. To reach the castle, they must pass through the nearby woods, and it is there that Tywin strikes. While Mace certainly anticipates an ambush, given the size of the Lannister host, he was expecting a few raiders and nothing more. Instead, he is greeted by thousands of hardened mercenaries. They emerge from the forest, raining arrows down upon the infantry. But as the foot soldiers lock shields and try to get into defensive formations, a thunderous bellow shakes the trees and sends leaves raining down. Elephants burst between the trees, knocking men over and throwing their forces into disarray. Only then did their infantry come running out and push through the gaps and battle the infantry. Those that don't quickly set fire to their siege engines. The battle soon turns into a massacre as Reachmen either run back to their homes or Mace Tyrell's camp, bearing news of what happened. The Lord of the Reach is shocked to hear this news, especially once he receives news that Tywin Lannister is taking the field himself. He is now marching out with an army of almost 15,000 strong, not even counting the Golden Company, who are threatening his rear. While some of the Reach lords desert and manage to make their way back safely to their home territory, the rest are captured along with Mace Tyrell. But Tywin is not done, and orders a full offensive into the Reach to capture Highgarden. The remaining Reach lords, led by Paxter Redwine, hurry to assemble a new host to challenge Tywin. Of the 10,000 who left with Mace, only about 3 remain. Tywin takes the lead, having most of the Golden Company march with him. with a small force remaining behind to watch their flanks and prevent any future incursions. They push deeper and deeper, with the Golden Company providing their worth on the battlefield. While they are known as effective soldiers, they seem particularly bold under Tywin. They rampage across the Reach, forcing their way through the region as Renly hurries to send men back to reinforce the undefended area. But until then, the Westermen and their sellsword allies have free reign. During the siege of Highgarden, Jon Connington is the first over the walls and helps open the gates for the rest of their army. When Sir Fossaway tries to check their advance in a nearby river, Franklin Flowers of the Golden Company leads a charge and secures a foothold for them. Lastly, Roland Duckfield leads the capture of Bitterbridge, securing their crossroads to the Stormlands. Meanwhile, the Northern War is reinvigorated with the arrival of the Valemen. Although technically sworn to House Lannister, many of the lords feel closer kinship to the Starks and eagerly place themselves under his command. They drive back Renly from the Riverlands entirely, and with the Reach under that, Renly is only left with Stormlanders to defend King's Landing. Jon Connington is quick to notice this, seeing how gifted the Starks are and how many allies they have accumulated. Although Lord Tywin does not wish to admit it, he is a junior partner. Robb commands more troops and has more allies, and his forces remain intact. In contrast, Tywin's forces are exhausted, and he has only managed to survive thanks to Robb Stark not wishing to fight against him. Even with their new allies in the Vale, their support is reluctant at best. But should this situation change, then Jon does not doubt who will triumph. Jon begins to secretly send letters to them, offering a secret alliance with them and even offering to marry Sansa Stark with Aegon VI. The offer is certainly tempting for Robb, who sees it as a chance to strike back at the Lannisters. But something holds him back. He recalls how he had sworn an oath to back Tommen's claim to the throne. Although he doesn't like it, Robb cannot bring himself to break that oath. Even as Jon Connington reminds him this oath was sworn under duress, just as the phrase did. But though this might be true, Robb still favors his word and refuses to break faith. More importantly, the continued threats from the Ironborn and even trouble beyond the Wall now leave them in a difficult position. This forces the Golden Company to search for new allies. While the North might not seem interested in working with them, they find allies on the other side of the continent. The Dornish have no love for Tywin and are eager to exact revenge on him. They secretly send a delegation offering to support their claim to the Iron Throne in exchange for a marriage to Ariana Martell. With this secret alliance in place, the campaign continues with the Golden Company earning their keep by fighting fiercely across the Reach. The Golden Company made sure to capture the castles and put some of their men to garrison it. Now they take full control of them, killing or capturing Westermen there and secretly making alliances with the Reachmen willing to help them. This leaves Tywin within enemy territory and allows the Reach to reorganize and launch a counterattack if that matter is not resolved. Though Tywin has the numbers, he doesn't have the time to take each castle one by one. Instead, he tries diplomacy, requesting a meeting to talk with their leader. They agree to meet at Cider Hall, but when Tywin arrives, he is surprised to see not Harry Strickland waiting for him, but Jon Connington.
I suppose I should not be surprised. I doubt homeless Harry would have the stomach to do such a thing. I've heard you were dead, Lord Connington. Very well. What is it you want? You know how much your success rides on your reputation. This will put a black mark on it. Rumors of my death were greatly exaggerated. As for our reputation, well, some contracts are made with ink, and others with blood. This is far from the first time the Golden Company has played kingmaker. But if you recall your history, we've always crowned dragons, not lions. Now, will you kneel before Aegon VI? And you expect me to believe that? A dozen boys could claim to be Aegon, and they would have as much claim as your boy. Whether you believe it or not is irrelevant. You should be worrying about giving me a reason not to kill you. And what would you gain from that? You kill me now and you lose the Westerlands. You lose my gold, you lose whatever legitimacy your cause might gain. You are correct. What I believe is irrelevant. What matters is what everyone else believes. The lords and ladies. The small folk. If they won't accept this Aegon as their king, it won't matter how strong his claim is. Perhaps. But I lose a traitor and a child murderer. No doubt the realm will thank me for it.
Or did you forget what you did to who you thought was Aegon?
And did you forget that before that, I served Ares faithfully for more than a decade? Do you think I woke up one day and decided to overthrow the crown? The Targaryens were rotting, and I put them out of their misery. I made the hard decisions that others couldn't make. Tell me, if you truly wish for Aegon to rule, are you prepared to make those same decisions now? Are you prepared to burn Stony Sept to find the prince?
We shall see. The terms Tywin presents to marry Cersei with Aegon are rejected, and the war continues. Tywin now sees no other choice but to launch an attack on half a dozen castles that seem weak. Though the Golden Company controls multiple strategic locations, their numbers are few, and they cannot easily support one another. Whenever a castle falls under attack, it can expect no support, which leaves its defenses tight but brittle. However, it also means Tywin cannot concentrate his forces, as they may rush to each other's aid. For a moment, it seems like Tywin might actually break through, but then the Dornish arrive. Thousands of them emerge from the Boneway like buzzing ants. Led by Oberyn Martell, they strike hard at the Lannisters' rear. With their offensive, Tywin had committed all his forces there, and was helpless to this. The Red Vipers strike hard, cutting through the Lannisters' rear and scattering their forces. Different castles open up their gates and sortie out, taking the Lannisters from both sides. By the end of the week, their offensive collapses entirely, and the weak, they are slaughtered or put to fight. Tywin is among the former, pursued relentlessly after his army breaks by the Red Viper, until he is eventually cornered near the borders of the Reach in the Westerlands, his patch blocked by a small garrison of sellswords, letting Oberyn catch up and run him through. The marriage arrangements were confirmed by both sides, and just as quickly as it began, the rebellion of the Gold Company was over. The sellswords eagerly join the army, and they begin their march to King's Landing. But instead of the Lion of House Lannister, they march under the three-headed dragon and the son of House Martell. The few Tyrell forces are easily swept aside, and they avoid the returning army to cross the border to the Riverlands, abandoning their holdings in the Reach after taking the riches and supplies back to safety. However, by the time they arrive, the battle is winding down. Renly's advantage was on his superior numbers, but without these forces, it was his turn to be pushed back to the Crownlands, and his forces dwindled every day. With his forces exhausted, Renly has no choice but to escape to King's Landing. By the time Jon Connington arrives, the Starks and Valemen have already begun laying siege to King's Landing. These forces arrive with much fanfare. The gathered lords all look out in surprise as he marches into the Red Keep, his silver hair streaming behind him, and he walks up to the throne room, dressed in all the finery fit for a king. All eyes turn to him as he marches down the camp room. Although this is his first public appearance, Jon explains that he has been fighting alongside the Golden Company, serving as a captain in their forces. But the reception is chilly. Many are initially surprised to see this sudden change of leadership. The Stark forces are cold and bound with obligation rather than loyalty, and once they hear that Aegon wishes them to rejoin the fold, they withdraw their forces, saying they have fulfilled their obligation. The Valemen are a little better and position their forces as far away from the sellswords as possible. It doesn't matter though, as even without the Kingdom of the North and rivers, this combined army already far outnumbers the Baratheon forces. Rather than storming the city, Jon is happy to starve them out in a slow war of attrition. Instead of a hurricane, it is a slow strangling. To hold such a city together requires a strong hand that Renly does not possess, and soon enough, he finds himself facing a war within his own capital. A small faction secretly lets Jon's men in, and this gap becomes a flood, as the sellswords and Lannister soldiers eagerly flood into the streets. Though pockets of resistance continue to persist, the battle is lost, and Renly is caught trying to escape on one of his ships. Jon addresses this problem by separating his head from his body. But no sooner has his head decorated the walls of spikes of the Red Keep does Aegon call for the lords to make an announcement. He is to marry Lady Arianna of Dorne. Meanwhile, the Stormlands and Reachmen who fought under Renly are to be pardoned, provided they bend the knee. Men wisely do so, even the Tyrells, once they are reminded that Jon Connington holds Mace Tyrell. The same is true for the Westermen. However, this proves to be a thornier issue. While Tywin might be dead, there are still Lannisters around. Many fled back west, including Kevan and Tyrion, while Cersei and her children remain in Volantis. With them is their claim to the Iron Throne. And they find surprising shelter with the Starks. Though Robb despises Tywin, he recalls how Tyrion provided his brother with a special saddle to help him walk again, and the dwarf quickly reminds Robb of this fact. At the very least, he can secure the promise of sanctuary if Aegon were to attack the West. Tywin's greatest legacy was not putting anyone on the Iron Throne, but securing an alliance with House Stark, which may serve his house. However, one alliance that doesn't hold is that with House Greyjoy. Though Tywin supported Balon Greyjoy's attack to pressure the north, reports soon emerge that he was dead, replaced with his younger brother, Euron. The famed pirate sails directly to King's Landing, not just to pay homage, but to also strike a deal. Instead of taking the fleet with him, he arrives only with silence, fat with loot that he provides the king, for a price.
So, at long last, a dragon finally sits on the throne once again. A flightless one. You best watch your tongue, pirate. This is your king. Why? Did I say something untrue? Is your boy king prepared to jump out the window and prove me wrong? I have nothing to prove here, pirate. You are here to provide me with a reason to accept you as Lord of the Iron Islands. Oh, I am not interested in those little rocks. My sights are set on something far greater. Lord Tywin gave us free rein to invade the North and Riverlands. Why would we settle for someone who gives us anything less? Because you have been driven off most of your gains. I will not start another war to satisfy some fool's conquest. And you have not answered my question. What do you have to offer me? I am not my brother. I do not make wars I cannot win. But to answer your question, accept my terms, and I shall teach you to fly.
He beckons his men forward, and several of Euron's crew emerge, bearing heavy chests. As he upends them on the floor, jewels and gold come spilling out. He reaches into the fold of his cloak and pulls out a smaller horn. This one was hastily repaired with bronze. As Aegon moves closer, he can sense the power within this horn. Nothing like any other.
They call it the Horn of Winter. A horn that is said to be capable of bringing down the wall. And what should we gain from that? Wildlings gather beyond the wall by the thousands. Bring down the wall, and they will flood into the north. With a war like that, they will not be able to resist you. So that is what I offer. Join me, and I shall give you the means to bring your enemies to their knees. Will you take that power, or do you wish to remain a flightless dragon, little king?
The Horn of Winter. He hesitates only for a moment before raising it to his lips and blowing with all his strength. A sound like the shattering mountains erupts from its depths despite its small size. It is a deep, unnatural wail that shakes the very air around him. The sound is mournful and sad. The moment the air leaves his lungs, a surge of unimaginable power floods through him. For a moment, he feels as if he could break the world as his vision blurs. His limbs tremble, and though he stands in King's Landing, something far away crumbles in response to his call. In the north, unseen to Aegon, but felt by the Night's Watch, the wall, the ancient magic holding the Great Barrier together, begins to unravel. Across its icy expanse, cracks spread like veins. Huge chunks break off and crash onto the earth, sending shockwaves across the land. Aegon staggers as the power fades from him, but exhilaration fills his chest. His eyes shift to the second horn, the one Euron promised would bring him dominion over dragons. Without hesitation, he makes his decision. He will claim the skies, just as he has claimed the earth. In the north, Robb Stark receives a dire warning. The wall is crumbling at the worst possible time. The wildlings are advancing. With winter descending, the north cannot afford to ignore such a great threat. Grim-faced, Robb withdraws a portion of his forces, sending them northward to confront the chaos spilling into his lands. The Riverlands, left vulnerable, become an opportunity for his enemies. Jon Connington seizes the moment. His forces surge into the Riverlands, striking deep and fast, targeting holdfasts and several supply lines. With Robb's strength divided, the once deadlocked war tilts in the favor of Aegon's cause. The Blackfish wages a desperate guerrilla war, striking hard into the enemy advancing from the Crownlands and even launching counter-raids through the God's Eye. It slows their advance, but it does not halt it entirely. The Golden Company cut a swath of destruction westward, capturing Harrenhal in a matter of days. In Riverrun, the remaining leaders of the Alliance, Tyrion Lannister, Peter Baelish, and Catelyn Stark, gather in secrecy to discuss the changing situation.
We have all played our hands, but the game is not over. We must decide now. Do we stand against Aegon together, or do we let him take the throne unchallenged?
If we fail here, the Riverlands will burn. What choice do we have but to fight? It pains me to admit it. That is our best choice.
Fight with what, exactly? The Northmen are rushing back home. The Riverlands are depleted, and the Westermen have lost their leader. It appears most of the fighting will be done by me. Therefore, it seems as though I should be the one organizing this coalition.
I do not like the sound of that, Lord Baelish. What is it that you've cooked up exactly?
Nothing that anyone in my position wouldn't do.
You've already gained my hand. Do not expect to steal the crown off my son's head.
Not at all. Well, perhaps nothing quite as brazen. I do have a requirement. As I have ties with both our kingdoms, allow me to maintain peace after the war. I wish to be named Hand for King Tommen, and that my children with Catelyn Stark be named Robb's heirs.
You're mad.
Lesser women would order your head for such a demand.
And yet, they would still agree. We live in maddening times, and that sometimes requires us to make sacrifices.
Everyone except you.
On the contrary, if I agree to this, I will be sending thousands of men, my people, to their deaths. But that is a sacrifice I'm willing to make. Tell me, are you willing to stomach that for the sake of your family's crowns?
Both of them stare at him, wanting nothing more than to throttle him for making such a suggestion. But as they glance out the window, all they can see is the Riverlands afire, and they know that this is only the beginning. As the war spirals further into chaos, the North finds itself battling on two fronts. Robb Stark and his forces clash against the wildlings, who pour through the shattered wall. While the Night's Watch desperately tries to refortify it, their numbers are too depleted, and wildling raiders all scramble up the wall, realizing the charms have faded. With that knowledge, Mance deems there is nothing to lose. Meanwhile, Euron Greyjoy adds to the disaster. His fleet sailing up the western shores, raiding and burning coastal settlements, threatening the north from yet another front. The Lannisters, already stretched thin, struggle desperately to repel both Connington's forces and a Dornish Reach offensive on their territories. Within the Riverlands, the Blackfish takes command of their armies, gathering whoever they can and meeting the Golden Company in the south. The battles are bloody as both veteran commanders throw everything they have. It is only with the arrival of the Vale Knights that they manage to hold the line. The war teeters on a knife's edge, and every day brings new devastation. Robb Stark orders a defensive line along the last river, using the natural barriers of the north to slow the wildlings' advance. Jon Snow, commanding the vanguard, leads daring raids into their camps, setting their positions ablaze and amassing smaller warbands, giving them some success. In the Riverlands, Jon Connington marches northward towards the Twins. It is a daring move, but one that is costly as the Rivermen strike from behind, raiding their supply lines and trying to cut them off. Meanwhile, in the west, Euron Greyjoy's longships strike deep into the north's vulnerable coast. His Ironborn sack Torrhen Square and burn Deepwood Motte. The Lannisters attempt to intercept Euron's fleet, but their warships prove no match for the seasoned raiders. Despite the overwhelming odds, Robb Stark finds some measure of success, pushing them back despite the heavy losses. The Free Folk are forced to come to terms with the bitter truth. Their greatest enemy is not the Northmen, but what lies beyond the wall. They had fled south not to conquer, but to escape. Mance Rayder soon comes to terms. He will fight alongside them provided they give his people land and protection. They make this very clear, and to Jon's horror as he watches these peace deals being signed, the wall, their greatest weapon against the White Walkers, has been weakened without a fight. Tyrion also catches wind of this and sweetens the deal, offering to let them settle in the southern Westerlands, repopulating the devastated areas and providing him with a buffer. As the remnants of the Lannister fleet arrive in the Stony Shores, driving back the Ironborn wherever they can, they also pick up the wildlings and begin to sail them back south. The balance shifts as the Free Folk join the army. Joined by giants and mammoths, they now have an equalizer for the Golden Company's elephants. Their ranks, bolstered by warriors hardened by the endless winter beyond the wall, grant the North renewed strength, enough to even the odds in the Riverlands. The The Reachmen reach as far as Silverhill when the first of these warriors reach them. As they surround the castle, the mammoths and giants begin to attack. The first line of them come rushing forward, trying to smash through their defenses. However, the Reachmen, under the command of Randyll Tarly, pivot and form up in a defensive formation. The mammoths, though powerful, are not made to break through the ranks of disciplined pikemen, and their charge falters. But then the giants come, braving the walls of spears and smashing into men with clubs, hammers, and fists. They don't break. They open up gaps for the wildlings to exploit. These free folk rush through, smashing into the Reachmen's flank, and begin to break up their defenses. The Reachmen are forced to scatter in disarray, letting the Lannister army move east. However, Aegon himself takes the field, marching south from the Crownlands with fresh reinforcements. He throws his might into the campaign for the Twins. His army pushes deeper, threatening to cleave the Riverlands in two. As this happens, the guerrilla war only intensifies, trying to halt their advance. As these battles rage, the Night's Watch fights desperately to hold what remains of the wall. The ruined defenses barely stand against the wildlings, but that was just the beginning of horrors that lurk beyond. The battle is desperate. The Watch fights with all the strength they can muster, but even with the wall as a partial defensive structure and stiffened by some extra wildling defenders, they cannot hold the undead at bay. The ice shatters beneath their feet as wights storm through the breaches. Dragon glass cuts through them, and hundreds fall. But it is not enough for an army in the thousands, which grows further. One by one, the castles of the Watch fall. The men gather in Castle Black to try and hold back the defenses and buy time for others to evacuate, when a cold breeze rushes across them, one that chills them to the very bone as the Night King joins the fight. He advances through the gate of Castle Black. A miniature ice storm blasts through. The Night King's blade is like a hurricane, cutting through Night's Watchmen left and right. The few remaining survivors retreat southward, bearing grim news. The dead do not simply march, they rampage. Villages vanish overnight. Northern lords receive frantic messages that the darkness is coming. Those who fight all die, and those who run are harried day and night. Suddenly, the north collapses entirely as Waymon Manderly organizes a hasty evacuation. Anyone and everyone who can rush south of the Neck, trying to escape however they can. The White Walkers push further south, their icy grip stretching beyond the devastated north and into the Neck. The frozen dead march through the swamps, chilling the air and killing all life in their path. The Cranagwig fight fiercely, using their knowledge of the land to slow the invasion with ambushes and traps, but it is not enough. The dead do not tire, do not falter, and they do not succumb to poison or muddy water. Even the hidden paths of the Neck are overrun. The last defenders of the swamps send desperate ravens southward, warning that they're coming. News of the disaster reaches Robb Stark and Riverrun. The king in the north gathers his commanders and urges them to turn their attention away from their petty battles and toward the true enemy. The dead march unchecked, and if they are not stopped, all of Westeros will fall. Tyrion Lannister quickly agrees, as do the Riverlords who already suffered the horrors of the war, and do not need much convincing. They swear their swords to the coming war, understanding that nothing else matters if the others are not stopped. But not all are so willing. Peter Baelish sees the rising terror as an opportunity rather than a threat. He begins withdrawing his forces, attempting to retreat towards the Bloody Gate. He cites that he is there to fight sellswords, and this is a threat beyond their understanding. He manipulates Robert Arryn, telling him that he needs all his knights to protect him. Meanwhile, the Golden Company remains unmoved by Robb's pleas. They have no ties to the Seven Kingdoms, and most are happy to leave them to their war. Harry Strickland can sense desperation when he sees it, and they begin negotiating a far more tangible reward. Robb makes a bold and unexpected decision. He relinquishes the North's independence, pledging his loyalty to Aegon VI in exchange for his support against the dead. This declaration shocks his bannermen, but it is the decisive act needed to sway the Golden Company. Their first act is to deal with Peter Baelish. Here is Harry's specialty, dealing with grumbling soldiers. He incites a mutiny among the Vale Lords. With Lysa Arryn gone and him so far away from Robert, they decide they have no reason to protect him. Baelish is quickly captured and executed. With his death, the Vale Knights throw their full strength behind Robb and Aegon. Meanwhile, the dead arrive at the Twins. Jon Connington holds the bridge, using fire and dragonglass to stem the tide of wights pouring forward. For a time, the strategy holds. The dead batter themselves against the bridge, fighting hard and pushing against the fortress, only to be met with a wall of spears. The fortress gates remain sealed, the bridges defended, and the position makes it an ideal spot to fight the dead. For a time it seems to work, but the Whites try something else. They rush towards the river, using their frozen bodies to make a bridge until even their skeletal horses can cross. Here, they are met with Jon Snow and his men, hacking them down as they reach the shore. He fights at the center of the chaos, his sword flashing as he slashes through the dead. The twins begin to buckle under the relentless assault as the dead gain a foothold and rush towards the other side. In the center, Euron Greyjoy continues to fight on the bridge, his Valyrian steel armor shimmering as he hacks through the Whites without fear. That is, until the Night King himself joins the fight. Laughing, he rushes towards him, his axe flashing as he strikes at the Night King. However, the ruler of the dead halted this attack with a casual parry. He glares down at Euron and then rushes at him, swinging his own blade into a strike that Euron barely blocks. Gritting his teeth, the Mad Reacher charges towards him, his axe is rising and falling in a series of brutal strikes. However, the Night King does not falter under these attacks and continues to halt them in their tracks, before suddenly thrusting his sword forward. The point finds a chink in his armor, slipping inside and driving Euron back, who clutches that wound. Before he even realizes what is happening, the Night King is on him again. As Euron falls, the defense on the undead bridge shatters, and the Whites surge forward, tearing into the ranks of the living. But then the sound of horns fills the air. The Knights of the Vale, their banners flying high, come charging into the fray. Armored lances slam into the Whites, breaking their advance and giving the defenders a moment to breathe. The Night King strides forward, his piercing blue eyes locked on the battlefield's heart. The ground itself freezes beneath his feet, and with a simple, commanding gesture, the dead rise anew, turning fallen men into enemies in an instant. Those who remain living find themselves torn apart. At the center of this is Jon Snow, who gathers the exhausted defenders and leads a final charge. He duels the Night King, their blades clashing in a flurry of ice and fire. Every strike is met with unnatural speed, every thrust parried with inhuman strength. It is a losing fight, but Jon does not yield. He ducks under his strike and then stumbles from a follow-up thrust. Jon parries a third strike and pushes it back. With this moment to breathe, he pushes forward and rushes at him, though his blade whistles towards him and he drives it into his side. But that doesn't stop Jon from plunging his blade into the Night King's chest. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then, the Night King shatters, his form exploding into 1,000 shards of ice. The Whites around him collapse instantly, crumbling into lifeless heaps. A great silence falls over the battlefield as the living stare in disbelief. The war is over. The dead are truly dead. With this war at an end, the long process of rebuilding takes place, and, as promised, Robb relinquishes his crown. Tyrion no longer has the strength to back Tommen's claim and cuts his losses. Still, the two maintain considerable influence in the rebuilding, and because of their success in the war. That's our theory. Westeros is a land filled with exciting stories and possibilities, and we love exploring them. If you want to accompany us on this journey across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel.